Thank you for coming to this evening's presentation. It's titled Science and Conscience, the Life and Legacy of the Venerable Jérôme Lejeune. My name is Daniel Betzela Richardson. I'm a member of Cardis's board, and on behalf of Cardis, I want to welcome all of you here to this beautiful space in this office. So Cardis is a leading Christian and nonpartisan think tank dedicated to clarifying and strengthening through research and dialogue the ways in which society's institutions can work together for the common good. I'm also a member of the Fraternity of Communion and Liberation, or CL. CL is an ecclesial movement in the Catholic Church. CL is a proposal of education towards Christian maturity to be co-workers in the Church's mission in all areas of society. Its name testifies how the Christian event is the truest response to human needs, which lived in communion is the foundation of a person's authentic liberation. Christianity is the adventure of life accompanied by Christ in the Church. This evening, we will hear about the namesake of Jérôme Lejeune's school, which is a missionary work of the Fraternity of Communion and Liberation here in Ottawa. So I just want to mention a few words about our sponsors, to whom we're very grateful. Starting at the Sapphire level, the Consortium of Independent Ontario Catholic Schools, Our Lady Seat of Wisdom College, the Ottawa Fraternity of Communion and Liberation, and at Gold, the Ottawa Guild of the Canadian Federation of Catholic Physicians and Societies, the St. Maurice Council of the Catholic Women's League of Canada, and our highest level of sponsorship, Ruby, we want to thank especially the Archdiocese of Ottawa-Cornwall. To give a brief introduction to this evening, I now want to invite Sophia Hyginus McConkey, the founding director and principal of Jérôme Lejeune School, to provide some remarks. Sophia?
Thank you. As Daniel mentioned, I am Sophia Hyginus McConkey, currently serving as principal and teaching at Jérôme Lejeune School, where we are honored to be under the patronage of such a great man. The inspiration to name a school after Venerable Jérôme Lejeune came just over 9 years ago, in January 2015, after attending a similar presentation on Dr. Lejeune at the University of Ottawa Faculty of Medicine. I recall being struck by Dr. Lejeune's great love for the other, for the least of these, as he often said, and his willingness to sacrifice for the truth. Although he was a great scientist, his simplicity made him very familiar, and his life's witness was inspiring. The presentation on Dr. Lejeune was organized by my friends in Communion and Liberation, the Catholic lay movement founded by the servant of God, Monsignor Luigi Giussani, whose educational charism would form the identity of Jérôme Lejeune School. The school began in September 2018, not as a project, but as an answer to the needs in front of us. Following Dr. Lejeune's example, the school offered a model of education that had the possibility of helping all children thrive, a Montessori-inspired pedagogy of education, a method founded on Dr. Maria Montessori's scientific observations of how children learn and develop. The school also prioritized offering the catechesis of the Good Shepherd, a unique Montessori-based approach to the religious formation of children. It was begun by biblical scholar Sophia Cavalletti. It is grounded in prayer, scripture, and liturgy. Jérôme Lejeune School operated for 2 years before going on hiatus in 2020. Reopening this past September, it was established as a private Catholic school and currently offers a hybrid enrichment program for elementary school-age children. In addition to offering a Montessori-inspired learning environment and the catechesis of the Good Shepherd, the language and arts curriculum was enriched with a Charlotte Mason-inspired classical approach that emphasizes great books, ideas, and relational learning. At Jerome Lejeune School, we are blessed to be standing on the shoulders of giants. First, as we follow the educational charism of Father Giussani, who had a unique ability to inspire a sincere search for the meaning of life in the hearts of young people and to awaken their desire for truth. Secondly, as we apply the time-tested pedagogy of Dr. Montessori and the educational models of Charlotte Mason to enrich the learning and development of our students, offering them a well-rounded education. And finally, being under the patronage of Dr. Jerome Lejeune, who embodies the values of truth and charity that we strive for with our students. I will close by expressing my heartfelt gratitude to all the event sponsors, our guest speaker, Dr. Mark Basik, my friends in the movement, parents, school staff and volunteers present, and for all of you for your presence here this evening at this presentation on Venerable Jerome Lejeune. Your support assists us in continuing this educational mission. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. I would now like to introduce Dr. Mark Basik. So Dr. Basik was born in Montreal. He graduated in medicine from McGill and completed a general surgery residency at the Université de Montréal, followed by a fellowship in surgical oncology at Roswell Park Cancer Institute. He was a visiting investigator at the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. He returned to Montreal in 2003, where he's now practicing breast cancer surgery at the Jewish General Hospital. And he is also the Herbert Black Professor of Surgical Oncology at McGill University. He heads the Cancer Genomics and Translational Research Lab at the Lady Davis Institute for Medical Research. His research interests include understanding the causes of resistance to therapy in breast cancer, as well as developing new diagnostic blood tests for breast cancer. Dr. Basik?
I just noticed. Okay. Thank you very much. It is humbling for me to be here to speak about my mentor, one of my mentors, one of my chief mentors, Jerome Lejeune, and in front of you all. When Sophia asked Madame Lejeune, his widow, for the permission, for the authorization to name the school after her husband, she agreed, but on two conditions. And one of those conditions was that we speak about Jerome Lejeune, we talk about him, we make him known, and that we, I think she said, even once a year or so, have a lecture about Jerome Lejeune. So I was honored to be the one who actually gave the lecture 5 years ago, 6 years, 5 years ago. And I'll do it again today. Again, it is a privilege and an honor to even to look at him, to look at his life, and just be amazed and get to know him more this time. We're also lucky because a new biography has just been published by Aude Dugast, who's the postulator of the cause of the beatification of Jerome Lejeune, and I really urge you to read it if you're interested. It's a bit of a big book, but it's written. I think it's been translated into English. Yes, it has. But it really is really quite remarkable because Jerome Lejeune, one of the things he did, and is whenever he was traveling a lot as a visiting scientist, he would always write letters to his wife every time he traveled, and daily letters. And so Aude Dugast had the privilege to actually have all these letters and to dive into them. And so when you read that biography, it really you enter really into the intimacy of his life, which is quite something. You're going to excuse me because I'm going to be moved a lot by just looking at the way he looked at everything. Jerome Lejeune for me is a model, is a mentor, even though I actually did see him once come to Montreal give a lecture, although at the time I didn't really know who he really was. But I rediscovered him after his death in 1994, about 10 years ago or so, when a friend of mine suggested that I learn more about Jérôme Lejeune, and then I read the biography at the time, and I was just blown away by this man. This man who is the consummate, perfect, if you will, clinician scientist, which is what I strive to be. His field was, and his great discoveries were in the field of genetics. He is known as the father of human genetics, of human chromosomal genetics. And I'm studying breast cancer, but like he, I, uh, I am a physician, and I'm also propelled, I guess, to study, to do the science that I do in the lab that I run at McGill, to answer the questions and to help to help my patients combat breast cancer, as he did, as you'll see, in fighting in trying to overcome the pain of those children who were born with genetic disabilities, or were born with some sort of with not the full capacity, as he would say, their full capacity, intellectual capacity in any case. He's known as the father of modern genetics. He discovered not only the cause for trisomy 21 or Down syndrome, but also several other genetic diseases as well, Cri-du-Chat and others. And yeah, so I'll tell you a little bit about him. I have several slides. Many of those slides contain citations, quotes, things that he said or that he wrote. So be reading them slowly, and hopefully you'll enjoy them as much as I will. So the title I was given was Science and Conscience, the Life and Legacy of Jérôme Lejeune. You see him here actually in front of a chromosomal panel. In those days, unlike now, and you'll see some pictures what we do now, you basically took a photo of mitographs through the microscope, you enlarge it, and you have to cut out with your scissors to look and count every single chromosome. Go ahead. So I'm just going to go ahead. So we start off here. We started in 1997. In 1997, Jean Paul II visits France for the World Youth Day. He goes to Paris. He's quite an infirm man at that point. He's got his Parkinson's and walking with a cane, but yet there's hundreds of thousands of youth that are wait for him in Paris. And then he leaves Paris to go and visit the rest of France, but he tells the bishops and the people that are organizing that he wants to go to Châlons-Saint-Mars. Châlons-Saint-Mars, I've been there. It's a small little city in the middle of nowhere, not far from Chartres, known for its cathedral, but Châlons-Saint-Mars is literally in the middle of nowhere in the countryside, about an hour south of Paris. And he wants to go there because he wants to visit the grave, pray at the grave of his friend, Jérôme Lejeune. Everybody was stunned. They didn't expect this from the Pope. And they said, no, we have you planned going to, I think it was Lyon after Paris and everything. He says, no, we're going to go. And they insist that, no, we have a planned schedule. We will not be going. He insists that we will be going. And he has them bring the map to him. This is where it is, and it's on the way, and we will stop there. And so they made arrangements rapidly in Châlons-Saint-Mars, this little community. There's about, 30 houses there. To go, the Pope's going to be coming to Châlons-Saint-Mars, and he's going to be landing in his helicopter and all the other helicopters in the middle of the field next to the cemetery, which is what he did. And this is a picture of him praying at the tomb of Jérôme Lejeune. And the big question, of course, was why? Why did he go there? And he went there because they were truly friends. And you'll see at the end, I'll end with what he said about him at his funeral, or the message that he sent for his funeral. But they're truly giants, intellectual giants. The Lejeune was an intellectual giant, but with a way of combining his faith and his reason that was seamless, that was completely united, which is one of the things that so fascinates me about Jérôme Lejeune. Next slide. So this is a citation taken from the wonderful book that his daughter Clara Lejeune wrote. I'm trying to remember the title of that. It's anyway, it's Beauty Blossoms. I don't quite remember. It's something like that. And she writes about her dad. Dad has, above all, a gaze. His blue eyes sparkle with intelligence and humor, and they look at you with infinite tenderness. Still, they are demanding because they love the truth. They are tirelessly seeking the why and the how of what they see. The true gaze of a scientist, but the true gaze of love as well, perfectly combined in this man. Next slide. So we'll start with a bit of history. He was born in 1926 in the countryside as well, south of Paris. And he wanted to become a country doctor, but then he was very good. He liked to work with his hands, and we'll see later on. I'll tell you a bit more about that. But he decided he wanted to become a surgeon and a general surgeon. And he studied for the exams, but he unfortunately fell asleep on the metro in Paris, going the wrong direction. And by the time he realized where he was, he didn't make it back in time for the exam. So he never became a surgeon, thanks God, to the goodness and the fortune of all of humanity. So he then decided to become. He began to work under Professor Raymond Turpin, who was a pediatrician and a scientist in Paris, and who had started a clinic for Down syndrome patients at the time in 1952. So he began to take care of these children. Next slide. Now, at the time, Down syndrome, the cause of Down syndrome was completely unknown. It had been described by an English physician in the 19th century, and it was thought that the cause was probably, since it happened, if something that became manifested at birth, could be due to perhaps a sexually transmitted disease, perhaps syphilis, perhaps there was all these theories about racial evolution. That's why it was called Mongolism at the time. It had been well described by Downs and others, but the point is that it was thought to be something not very good, not very nice, and in fact, probably a sign of something bad that had happened in the family or something that the parents had done, etc. And these children were ostracized. Their parents were ostracized as well. They were not taken care of. They were really put to the side of society, not only the children, as I said, and the parents. And nobody really looked at them with any kind of concern or any kind of dignity. Next. Around in the 30s and the 50s, the science of genetics was born. Those who know your history, it sort of was born with Mendel, who discovered the idea of genetics and genes. At the end of the 19th century, chromosomes were found, and they found that in flies and fruit flies, certain chromosomal certain mutations, certain characteristics were due to problems in chromosomes. And so Turpin already had the intuition, about 15 years before, that there might be a link between chromosomal abnormalities and Down syndrome, as it was in the fruit fly. Next slide. And so just to give you a little 101 in genetics or chromosomal, you know that your DNA is packaged into chromosomes. It's like anyway, you'll see that the DNA actually is packaged. This is not quite right, in fact. DNA is packaged as genes. The DNA contains nucleotides, which is packaged as genes, which contain information, and these genes are then placed into chromosomes. So if you will, the letters make sentences, the sentences make chapters, the chapters make your genetic code, the chapters are the chromosomes. That's a good part about this diagram. So these structures were being seen, again, identified in animals, in flies, and it began to be clear that different kinds of different species had different kinds of chromosomes, different numbers of chromosomes. But nobody had yet looked at a human cell, and nobody had yet understood, how many chromosomes there were actually in a human cell. And that required a technological advance. Science moves forward often not only by intuitions, as in Einstein, but by technological advance. Certainly medical research often moves forward in that way. And I'll give you an example in the next slide, I think. Slide. Okay, no. So the idea of chromosomes was also, the idea of genetics being involved came to Lejeune and to Turpin because of certain characteristics about Down syndrome at the time. First of all, by observation, he noticed that the dermoglyphics on their hands, the hand lines, were different. And this suggested something that was quite complex, not just a single gene, but something that had to happen quite early on and involve a lot of genes. Other characteristics, it was really rare to have identical twins with Down syndromes, but less rare to have fraternal twins, like one with Down syndrome, one not, suggesting that it was happening probably it could have something happening in the development of the embryo, but not super early, but at some point it would happen. Go ahead. So this is the picture from my lab from yesterday. In fact, we're actually looking at breast cancer, and we're trying to understand why breast cancer, when it spreads, when it metastasizes, is often incurable, as opposed to breast cancer when it's just in the breast. And thanks to a completely new technology that didn't exist 5 years ago, we're able to look at these biopsies from lesions, from metastatic lesions, and actually being able to differentiate. You see these different colors, the cancer cells, which are in green, from the stromal cells, which are what are called fibroblasts, which are in red. And this new technology actually allows us to lift off, to actually take these cells, separate them from these cells, and do all kinds of deep analysis on them to see how they talk to each other. This is something that's completely new, and we're all excited in the lab. I spent the whole morning today looking at these tumors. This is a new technological leap, which is going to allow us to understand how metastatic disease works in the breast like never before. So similarly to Lejeune, next slide, the technological leap that was necessary was to be able to see the chromosomes. And this happened in 1956. In 1956, the great discovery was made. Finally, somebody was able to take a slide, a human cell, spread out the chromosomes, and count them. And the counting came out to be 46. So this was news in 1956. The longest chromosome is the first one, the shortest one is 22nd, then you have the sex chromosomes, X and Y. So they get progressively smaller, 1 through 22. So these had been counted, and these had now been seen. So Lejeune knew about that, and somebody in Turpin's lab went out to learn this technique, as we did with our technique, and brought it back. And so he took some saliva, he took some cells from the kids with Down syndrome, and looked at them under the microscope. And what he saw was on the next slide. He saw an extra chromosome right there, 21. But you'll notice it's one of the smallest, it's the next to smallest chromosome, right? So at first he said, oh, it must be a piece of this chromosome that's cut off. It probably is an extra chromosome. So he was not sure about it. He had to do this several times. And every time he would take one of these cells from one of these children, he'd always see this small little chromosome, and he identified it and said, it must be an extra chromosome 21. This is the first time anybody had seen a disease with an abnormal chromosome, which is why he's called one of the fathers of human genetics. What is remarkable about that, he saw this in 1958 in May. And he was actually traveling. He was supposed to give a conference in Montreal a few weeks later, or a week later. And he got on a plane. He quickly took these pictures, and put them in his briefcase and went out to Montreal, met some scientists, then was going to LA, meet some others, and back to Paris. Everywhere he went, he took out that photomicrogram and showed it to people, showed it to his colleagues. Look what I'm seeing, look what I'm seeing, look what I'm... Of course, what scientists often do, they don't believe. They look, no, there's some sort of mistake. This is a piece of the chromosome. That's another one. No, I've done it several times. And what amazes me is that he wanted to share and spread the news. Scientists these days are very much not like that. We want to keep the news so that we can publish first and get all the glory, and help our students move on, whatever it is, and not spread the news. But he wanted to spread the news. He wanted to tell. Because he wanted science to move. He wanted to have their opinion. What do you think of this? So, fortunately, so he came back. So he came back and looked for more cells to make sure, and indeed, it was always confirmed. So then they published, and that was the beginning of his genetic and his research career. Now it's a bit unusual that there was an extra chromosome Also, another characteristic of a scientist is that you have to be able to see and recognize the unexpected. Most, I think, scientists, even Lejeune and Turpin, would have thought that there would be something missing, right? Because these children, these individuals, don't have a fully developed, perhaps, intellectual capacity and so on. So it seemed that there's something less. But instead, there was something more. This is such a paradox. And it fascinated him and asked him and made him think a lot. Next slide. And made him actually design several models. But before that, the first consequence is that the dignity of these individuals was restored. This was not a sexually transmitted disease. This was not something terrible that their parents had done or caught or whatever, but it was something out of their control. It was something genetic. So that's really one of the first things that happened when he made this discovery. And I'll show you in a slide later on how he says that, when you have a disease like this, you find science helps to actually help these people if it's used properly. This was the birth, as I said, of medical cytogenetics. There are other diseases, Cru du Chat, other chromosomes that he discovered as well that were also causative of other genetic disorders. But coming back to the question, why do you have an extra chromosome? Unusual. So he began to think, and the analogy he came up with was the analogy of an orchestra. The brain is very complex. It requires many factors to get to work together, many cells, and it's very, very complex. We still don't quite understand the brain. But he compared it to an orchestra playing a symphony, a symphony of somebody's symphony. And he said it requires that all the players play in harmony. If you have one musician that plays faster than everybody else, it becomes a cacophony. It destroys the entire symphony, one musician that plays differently. And that's the analogy he used, which I thought was a brilliant musician. So then this gives you a link, an idea to the complexity of biology, the complexity certainly of brain development. Next slide. The fact that he began to look at this more deeply, and he actually drew this himself. This is his drawing, copy of his drawing, where he put together all the metabolic pathways that could be involved, just to give the idea of the complexity. And I liken this to perhaps one of the earliest representation of what we now call currently systems biology. We now look at biological systems in this way as very complex systems that interact with each other. Lejeune had his intuition already in 1958. Next. So Lejeune's main goal was not just to make discoveries like most physicians. They are doing this because they want to help their patients. And indeed, that was his prime motivation, is to find a way to find a cure, to cure his little patients. If I could find a cure for trisomy 21, this would lead to a cure for all the other diseases that have a genetic origin. An interesting intuition, which we still have not proven because we still don't have a cure for trisomy 21. My patients are waiting for me. We'll find it. It is impossible not to find it. It is an intellectual effort that is much less difficult than sending a man to the moon. We're in the early 60s now when John F. Kennedy decides to put all the effort to bring a man to the moon. And I suspect he's right. If we had proportionally put that as much money and energy into sending someone to the moon as we did to the man in the moon, into looking for a cure or looking to understand or therapies for trisomy 21, I think we'll be much further along. Go ahead. So what do? How can a gene overdose hamper the functioning of the brain? We are forced to look for some metabolisms, which is a shift of equilibrium between the specific speeds of biochemical reactions. Those are all those wheels that you saw in that previous diagram, which we now call the Lejeune machine. How could it be deleterious? So you have to dig into, again, science is interesting because as you go deeper, you discover something, then all of a sudden you realize you have to learn a whole new field. Working in drug resistance in breast cancer, we discovered that resistant cells in breast cancers are full of fat droplets. We knew nothing about fat droplets. So we're starting to learn, we have to learn everything about lipids and lipid metabolism. He had to start learning biochemistry, molecular modeling, and he started to focus in on folic acid. In 1979, a trouble of monocarbon's metabolism was presented as the possible sensitive target in those individuals with intellectual deficiencies. So he actually did a lot of, he really thought that that was one of the key linchpins in this machine to understand the development of the brain. And what's interesting is that I was telling the story, I was coming over here, that about 6 years ago, 6, 7 years ago, no more, 8, 9 years ago, I had the privilege, together with a scientist who actually was working on trisomy 21, to go to his house. His widow was still alive at the time, Bert, and she said, you should look at his diary. Nobody's really cared to look at it. So we sat down, handwritten diary, we started reading it. It took us several days, and he talks a lot about that. And so based on that intuition, we now there's a clinical trial that's about to start in Italy, run by this colleague of mine, Dr. Stripoli, with a byproduct of folic acid to see whether it can improve the intellectual capacity, cognitive abilities of children with Down syndrome. So he had these intuitions, and we still think that those intuitions may be correct, even though he had zero means to really explore this properly, the same kind of means that we have right now. Go ahead. Yet he wrote that there was an advantage of having faith for him to be a scientist. And I'm telling you all these things in a very positive way, but of course, a lot of science is not done that way. But for him, there's a spirit that has not only written the laws of the universe, but has created us men in his image. Thus, if it is truly like this, the one with faith has a great advantage because he is an optimist for the following reason. It is reasonable to hope that his limited mind will come to understand in a limited way the laws of the universe. The gaze of science thus benefits from faith. Faith encourages the scientist to remain constantly open to reality in all its inexhaustible richness. He saw that little piece of chromosome, almost the smallest chromosome, and identified it for what it was able to recognize it, even though it was something completely against what everybody was thinking at the time, that it would be something missing. So that kind of attitude is also something that for me is really a signpost. I had this discussion before yesterday, one of my students, where you have to question everything. You can't trust anything. You can't trust what your colleague did. You have to redo it and make sure and check it. Well, science will never move forward if she continues to do that. In fact, I'm very, very concerned about her for that reason. But science moves because you look for something. You're waiting for something. You might not find what you were looking for, but you're waiting for something. That's what science really is. You do the experiment, and the experiment comes out exactly as you wanted. That in itself is, to me, always is a surprise, because it means that your intuition about reality was correct. But if it turns out to be something different, that's a better surprise, because then you've learned something and a door is open to you to go into it. Again, if you're open to it, if you're expecting it, if you're waiting for it. Go ahead. So he became very famous. He was running around the world giving conferences everywhere, and his discovery was well known. In 1969, the American Society of Human Genetics decided to give him its highest award, which is the William Allen Memorial Award in San Francisco. This is sometimes a prelude to the Nobel Prize. There's no doubt he had been nominated potentially for the Nobel Prize at this time. And so he went to San Francisco to deliver his lecture and to accept this award. At the time, however, it began to be his discovery, this exochromosomes, it began to be clear that you can do an amniocentesis in women who are pregnant and actually do a karyotype and see the chromosomes. You could find that extra chromosome there. That was a discovery that allowed people to say, well, now we can actually do something about it. And that doing something was to eliminate the fetus, to do abortions. He began to be aware of this kind of trend in thought. And he decided to say something about that at this meeting. And that took quite a bit of courage. Go ahead. So when he arrived, there was an earthquake. that very week, there had been an earthquake, as there often could be in San Francisco. Next. But the biggest earthquake, as one of the people who met him that day, was actually Lejeune's speech at the William Memorial Award. So he was greeted that evening, as always are. Professor Rise invited professor. You're greeted by two young, whippersnapper students. You send them to a restaurant, to get to know the professor, etc. So one of these was Charles Epstein, who eventually would receive the award himself. I'll tell you about him at the end. And so they were all excited to tell him, there are two of them, to tell him about, get to meet the great professor, but also tell him that, look, we're going to start abortion soon. And so his face changed. This was not what he expected, in a way. And he was there considering what to do, what to say the next day. And he said, I'm going to say what I need to say, even though he knew it would be problematic. And so he gave this very, very deep speech called On the Nature of Men. And he said that we have the National Institutes of Health that allows us to research what the causes of disease. But if we want to pretend that we're eugenicists and use this information to kill, then we should perhaps create a National Institute of Death. And these, I would suggest, would be its guiding principles. To prevent any possible error, the advisor should be chosen, et cetera, to destroy, to delete, decry any human condition voted against by the above-mentioned Board of Advisors of National Institutes of Death. After he gave his speech, no one clapped. No one said anything. He just came off the podium, and they just made room for him to come down and sit. This was the beginning of the end of his career, in a way. In fact, later on, he wrote to his wife, this Nobel Prize that had been talked about is gone. Indeed, he never received it. Continue. So he talked about, it's a very, very, very interesting speech from the scientific point of view, from the philosophical point of view, very deep. I've got a few quotations from it. So the question is to kill or not to kill. Such a problem is so close to us and so obviously important that it has become one of the possible immediate consequences of recent advances in technical capabilities and theoretical knowledge. So it seems appropriate that human geneticists realize that the question to kill or not kill is by no means purely practical or technological, i.e., we must face this question. Next. Nevertheless, we human geneticists have to face everyday reality. Disabled children and distressed parents exist. I believe our response must be guided by two sentiments, humility and compassion. And he ends his speech by talking about that. Next. Humility, because we must recognize we have no ready-made answers, because geneticists have not broken the secret of the human condition, because scientific arguments are of little help in ethical issues. Compassion, because even the most disinherited belongs to our kin, because these victims are poorer than the poorest, because the sorrow of the parents cannot be consoled by science. But should we capitulate in the face of our own ignorance and propose to eliminate those we cannot help? Next. And this is the last sentence of his talk. For millennia, medicine has striven to fight for life and health and against disease and death. Any reversal of the order of these terms of reference would entirely change medicine itself. It happens that nature does condemn. Our duty has always been not to inflict the sentence, but to try to commute the pain. In any foreseeable genetic trial, I do not know enough to judge, but I feel enough to advocate. In other words, the fail-safe position is to advocate and to save the patients, not the other way around. So, what did I want to say about this? Yeah. Go ahead, next slide. Yeah, and so when he came back, so that was a public position he took. And slowly but surely, he began to see that the support, even within the scientific community, was beginning to ebb away from him. And he would say this, it's for me a very bewildering statement that if a human geneticist cannot tell if human life does exist, he's speaking about the existence of human life. It's bewildering because it means he does not know what a human being is. He does not know that a species is existing, and I cannot agree with this statement. For him, the discovery of the chromosomes labeled, in a sense, it put an identification mark, if you will, on what a human being is. And so clearly, all these children have these chromosomes, the 46 or the 47 chromosomes, and they're human. All human genetics is there to tell us what our species is, what the members of our species is. Otherwise, it would not make any difference between chimpanzee and man. Next. He would go on and later on to say, intelligence teaches us that the number of possible combinations of the various genes transmitted to us from our father and mother surpasses the number of humans who are alive today or who will ever live on Earth. It teaches us that each one of us possesses and is endowed with an absolutely original composition that has never before occurred and that will never occur again. Even identical twins are not completely identical. When we look at his genetic identity card, we not only see that every human being is unique, but that she was born from a father and mother who in their turn were also unique. And he predicted, and this is now so true, in a few years from now, machines like those in supermarkets, cash registers, and that's how big sequencers are now, will be able to read this identity card with the only difference that the machine will never be able to give the price of human life. And I said, and this is, they accused him of doing this because he was a Catholic. He said, no, it's because it is the reality. It is science. If, and I hope God will never permit that, the Pope was saying that abortion was killing nobody, I would stop being a Catholic for scientific reasons. Because no moral authority can make me believe that discarding an early human being is not discarding a human being. Go ahead. This is similar to what Pope Francis said about 10 years ago now, in fact, when so many times in my life as a priest, I've heard objections, tell me, why is the church opposed to abortion? For example, is it a religious problem? No. Is it philosophical problem? No. It's a scientific problem because there's a human life there and it is not lawful to take out a human life to solve a problem. Next. So he became, willy-nilly, became an advocate for his patients, for his kids. And the way it happened, next. I mean, first of all, he had the largest clinic in the world of Down syndrome, over 5,000 patients, and he knew each of them by name. There's so many beautiful stories. You read the book right now, where parents would come with their kid to him, their Down syndrome kid, and for the first time, they saw somebody would look at the child with worth, would play, would call him his or her name. He would sit the children on his lap and play with them and so on. And they would just come out of that clinic completely amazed, flabbergasted. These simple gestures are for us a revelation. He was not examining a sick individual, but our child. He explained everything to us, the nature of the illness and what future our child could expect. And we left with our child and with peace in our heart. He made us discover the love of parents. We became close friends in Montreal with a Down syndrome woman who was diagnosed with breast cancer, which is how I met her. And her mother told me that she was born in Greece, and at the time, and doctors were telling her she was their first child, that they should never have children again because they had the Down syndrome child. So she went to Lejeune, and Lejeune told her, that's bullshit. No, you can definitely have children. She has two beautiful daughters, thanks to Jerome Lejeune. Now they're younger. And she actually would go every 6 months, she'd go to Paris to visit Jerome Lejeune. Nada has passed away from breast cancer 2 years ago, but she was quite a remarkable individual. In fact, she was here the last time we spoke in 2014. Go ahead. So this is when it became critical. The children themselves told him that they needed his help. It's striking. One day, a 10-year-old child with Downs came to the clinic. He was crying, was inconsolable. His mother explained he saw yesterday's debate because he would be debating on TV. He'd be the only scientist really with any kind of credibility who would say anything about this, defending the children. And the child threw his arms around my father's neck and said, they want to kill us. They want to kill us. You must defend us. We are too weak. We are not able to do it alone. So at that point, next slide, he decided to defend them. He came to his team, to the team members, I will be forced to publicly take a stand to defend our patients. If I didn't defend them, I would betray them and would renounce what I have in fact become, their natural advocate. It's interesting now, being an advocate is one of the criteria we use to evaluate medical students and residents as well. And usually we just pass over and say, this is just BS, whatever, who knows what that means. He knew what that meant. And this is a natural lecture and understanding what it really means. Go ahead. More quotes. It cannot be denied that the price of genetic disease is great in terms of suffering for the individual and troubles for society. That is without mentioning what the parents have to bear. If these individuals could be eliminated early, the savings would be enormous, but we can assign a value to this price. It is exactly that which a society has to pay to remain fully human. So from this point on, he began to be ostracized. He began to lose his grants. He was severely criticized for his public position. People from his lab that he wanted to promote were not getting promoted anymore. And there's nothing worse for a professor not to be able to attract good students. And he was no longer able to attract them because they're afraid of being in his lab. He faced harassment from university and state officials and did not receive an increase in salary for nearly 20 years, even though the Sorbonne had created the first chair in human genetics for him when he discovered Downs, the trisomy 21. His research grants were withdrawn and he was forced to close his laboratory. American and English laboratories, indignant at his treatment, granted him no-cost private loans. He actually received a donation from the Kennedy Foundation, which really helped him. This solidarity allowed him to rebuild a team inspired by the same motivations. Go ahead. So what is the solution for him? It was very clear. He wasn't going to win the debate. The laws, the abortion laws were passed. It became legal in France and everywhere else in the world. But the solution was to intensify his research. And it's interesting, he often quoted this. Pasteur's life was to show, who discovered microbes, right? Infections, that those who burned plague victims in their homes were not the ones to liberate humanity from rage, from rabies and plague, but rather it was those who had attacked the disease and observed the patients and had made the scientific discoveries that were necessary to cure these diseases. And that was his idea. So now abortion become the only way left is to cure them and quickly. So I'll devote day and night using biochemistry, molecular modeling, physiology to find a way. He liked to work with his hands, I told you, beginning, and I forgot to bring it because I actually have one of his little models in wood of the DNA molecule that he actually created. It's in my bedroom as a sort of what's the word, a saint's relic. So he created a lot of the things to try and understand how these molecules are interacting with each other, DNA and so on, folic acid alike. Go ahead. Now I'm going to end with this little episode. Charles Epstein was one of the young scientists that had been with him in San Francisco. Charles Epstein himself, many years later, 33 years later, received the same prestigious Allen Memorial Award and gave the same lecture. At that lecture, it was very interesting. He started by saying this lecture, there have been many other memorable talks over the years, but one that is still particularly vivid in my mind was given by Jérôme Lejeune in 1969, 33 years before, 10 years after the discovery of trisomy 21. The meeting in 1969, which was in San Francisco, is notable for more than Lejeune's talk since it had the added attraction of the San Francisco specialty gentle earthquake, as you heard. Then he goes on to say at the end, he describes his discoveries, which are notable. As much as we talk about neutrality and non-directiveness in genetic counseling, the message that these programs convey is that it is really not all right to give birth to a child with serious abnormalities. Why have I juxtaposed these troublesome thoughts about prenatal diagnosis and disability rights to description of my research into the mechanisms by which extra chromosomes cause their deleterious effects? My reason is quite simple. It is to remind us that the operative word in human genetics is human. Human genetics is about human beings, about humanity and humanness. Next slide. And so he described the models, hopes and fear in society is the goals of interest in society. And then he proposed on the basis of what Lejeune has said to modify that model. Next slide. And to put in, of course, the human being. Next slide. So for Lejeune, knowledge places the person at the center. Even when he was dying, he died in 1994, as many chain smokers from lung cancer, unfortunately. And in some of his last words, he said, I've been a doctor who had to cure them, and now I'm leaving. I have the feeling of abandoning them. Next slide. I don't have much, so I've given them all my life, and my life is all that I had. I'm abandoning them, my children. If I leave you a message, this is the most important of all. We are in the hands of God. I have experienced this a number of times. Next slide. So when he died, so before he died, he got diagnosed with lung cancer, I believe it was in December or January. He receives January. He receives a call from Pope John Paul II, I think in January. Pope wants to create a new Pontifical Institute of Life. And I want you to be the head of this. Lejeune answers, I've got lung cancer, I'm dying. He says, I don't care. I want you to be the head. And I know there's all kinds of other similarities, and they met often and they spoke often. And so when he died, Lejeune, of lung cancer on Easter Sunday in 1994, which is 30 years ago, 2 weeks ago, Professor Lejeune, this is the message that he sent, had always been able to use his profound knowledge of life and of its secrets for the true good of men and of humanity, and only for this. Professor Lejeune assumed the full responsibility that was his as a scientist, and he was ready to become a sign of contradiction without caring about the pressures bearing on him by a permissive society or about the ostracism to which he was subjected. We are faced today with the death of a great Christian of the 20th century, of a man for whom the defense of life became an apostolate. It is clear that in the present world situation, this form of lay apostolate is particularly necessary. We want to thank God, he who is author of life, of all that Professor Lejeune has been for us, of all that he has done to defend and promote the dignity of human life. April 4th, 1994, read at the funeral mass. So I think that's the last slide. No, final words. We are at the service of the patient. We are not at the service of the disease. And this is something that he always said. Hate the disease, love the patient. Anyway, it's a challenge it's such an inspiration for me as a physician to see the way he was with his patients and the way I hope to be with my breast cancer patients. It is also an inspiration to see how he was as a scientist, the originality of his thought, his capacity to see things, and to see things that others perhaps wouldn't see. But the most amazing thing is how these two are together seamlessly. And that, for me, is really the thing that really inspires me, and what I would like to follow in the Genome. Thank you.